Hi guys, my name is Navya Dalmia and I am a senior zooming in from Seattle, Washington and presenting my research paper on how minimum wage increases affect low-wage workers in the United States. Okay, so first I just want to provide a little bit of background on what minimum wages are and how they currently stand. So minimum wages are the lowest wage a person can earn per hour mandated by the federal law. And the current federal minimum wage stands at $7.25, which has not changed since 2009. But state and county level minimum wages can be above this federal minimum wage and could change on a yearly basis. So why did I want to study minimum wages? My interest in the topic first started when I personally understood what it means to work a minimum wage job. The summer after my sophomore year of high school, I worked as a restaurant hostess at the Overlake Golf and Country Club, where I was paid the Washington state minimum wage of $15, which is already way above the federal minimum wage. But through this experience, I learned that minimum wages don't really provide enough money, and especially for people who are trying to sustain a living off of this wage. This topic was also very interesting to me because of the current national news around minimum wages. So during his first year in office, President Joe Biden said that a job is more than a paycheck, it's about dignity. When I was running for president, I said it was past time to increase the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. Since then, President Biden has been working towards this effort of increasing the federal minimum wage to $15. So taking in all of this news and my personal experience, I was led to wondering, shouldn't minimum wages increase with rising inflation? My hypothesis was that minimum wages should be good for low-wage workers and an increase in them should help the low-wage working community. But clearly there must be some reason why low wages have not risen to stay up with inflation. So this led me to my research paper's main question of how does increasing minimum wages harm low-wage workers? To start the research process, I dove into a review of past literature on minimum wages, which was honestly a really well-studied topic that has a lot of different research done. So most deeply, I dove into the famous Card-and-Kruger study of 1994. So in this famous study, two economists, David Card and Alan Kruger, studied the effect of increasing minimum wages on low-wage workers in New Jersey. To do so, they called fast food restaurants in New Jersey and in Philadelphia before and after an increase in minimum wages in New Jersey to record two things: the change in prices and the change in employment rates in the fast food restaurants in Philadelphia and in New Jersey. The economists found that with the increase in minimum wages in New Jersey, when compared to no increase in minimum wage in Philadelphia, didn't correlate with a change in a degree of price or unemployment increase. So there was like no effect of minimum wage increases. A few years later, two other economists, William Washer and David Newmark, recreated this Card-and-Kruger study, but instead of calling restaurants to collect data, they used national data sets from the Employment Policies Institute. And conversely to the Card-and-Kruger study, they found that higher increase in minimum wages did in fact correlate with higher increases in prices and unemployment. So using the same kind of concept and idea, the two studies found contradictory results. While Card-and-Kruger said that minimum wages had no effect on prices and unemployment, Washer and Newmark said they had significant negative effects. So these two research papers, alongside many others that I read on my research journey, led me to realize that my answer to this question wasn't quite simple and was very highly debated. I wanted to understand this on a deeper level with more recent data, something that none of the researchers in my review had done. Therefore, I conducted my own research on how increasing minimum wages in Washington impact low-wage workers from the years of 2016 to 2022. To do this, I was able to examine Washington as a treatment group using Oregon State as a control because the yearly increases in minimum wages in Washington occur every January, while they do in July for Oregon. So I was able to use no increase in minimum wage in Oregon as my control group. So like in the Newmark and Washer study, for my research, I was able to extract data on unemployment from the current population surveys, or the CPS, and prices from the current price indices, the CPI. I was then able to use these data subsets and conduct regression analyses in R to understand the relationship between minimum wages and their effects on prices and unemployment. So as I just mentioned, for my research, I mainly focused on the two effects of prices and unemployment. My two main questions were, does an increase in minimum wage cause an increase in price? And does an increase in minimum wage cause an increase in unemployment? So through this deep dive, I found that minimum wage increases in Washington from 2016 to 2022 did overall adversely impact low-wage workers through an increase in prices, while I didn't find convincing evidence for unemployment. So when I'm looking at the results here on this slide, you can see the two main figures from my association with minimum wages and prices. In these two graphs on the x-axis, you can see the change in minimum wage by percentage, and on the y-axis, you can see the change in prices from the CPI. And for the figure on the left, what we see is a positive correlation of 0.109, which when put into R to see the statistical significance, it was statistically significant. Then the figure on the right, I took out the three main outliers that are circled on the figure on the left to see if those outliers were making a big difference in the correlation. And without those outliers, we saw a little bit of a higher correlation of 0.199. So both of these graphs together showed that prices may increase with minimum wage increases, as our data showed that there was a positive correlation. Okay. Now on this slide, you can see the takeaway from my deep dive in the association between minimum wages and unemployment. For this part of my research, I extracted data on unemployment from the CPS in Washington and Oregon between, again, 2016 and 2022, and saw how the changes in unemployment between Washington and Oregon differed through parsing through the data and doing regression analyses in R. So when looking at this kind of complicated table, the main things I just want you to look at are the highlighted yellow boxes. These highlight the difference between Washington and Oregon in the change in mean unemployment. So when this number is negative, this means that the unemployment in Washington went down more than the unemployment in Oregon. In a world where minimum wage increases directly and heavily impact unemployment, the regression analyses would show that those highlighted terms would always be large positive numbers, which would then mean that unemployment in Washington is going up more than in Oregon because of the change in minimum wage in the state. Since this is not the case, we have some small positive, some small negative, and some large negative, some large positive numbers in our data. We didn't find convincing evidence that unemployment directly minimum wage increases directly affect unemployment rates. Although the current research I did on unemployment in Washington showed little correlation with minimum wage, there is still a lot more research to be done here. So with difference and difference modeling in R, I can better understand the numbers in the table provided in the previous slide. The equation given here is kind of complicated, but basically what it would show is the statistical significance of the data collected in table 2. So like those numbers may seem a little bit all over the place, but they could be statistically significant in showing that minimum wage increases in Washington do correlate with unemployment rate increases. But this is something that I don't really have that much knowledge on, and I hope to learn more about R coding to gain the skill set needed to conduct these analyses and further understand this relationship. Okay, so although there is more research to be done here, I definitely learned a lot from this project. Going into the research, I thought that minimum wages should increase with rising inflation because higher minimum wages would be good for low-wage workers. But through looking at a lot of different research papers in the past and conducting my own research, I found that a minimum wage increase could definitely be correlated with an increase in prices and also potentially an increase in unemployment, therefore not necessarily being a good thing for low-wage workers. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have a question. What would you suggest as a policy change, if you could, based on all of the research that you've done so far?
I definitely don't think that increasing the minimum wage from $7.25 to a $15 increase would be a very good idea for our economy right now, just because that's like doubling the price in a world where we're already like having a lot of economic changes. I do think that the idea of state and counties changing their wages by like 50 cents or $1 each year, which is currently what's kind of happening,
Mhm.
is better just because, like, for example, living in Washington, I think because our economy has been doing better for the past 2 years, the minimum wage has have been increasing more, and that's been sustainable. So I think going on that county level and increasing minimum wages by county is probably a better idea.
Great. Yeah. Is there anything very shocking that you learned, or what was the most shocking thing that you learned in your research?
Honestly, just like the really direct correlation between an increase in minimum wage and an increase in prices. I
Mhm.
wasn't really expecting there to be like such stark data on that because I thought that it would probably be like a less direct impact, but just seeing that show up, but then also seeing so many famous like economists say that, well, prices don't really increase with an increase in minimum wages was really interesting because it was just so widely debated that I wasn't expecting it to be something that's not so clear.
Yeah, yeah. And do you have any plans to kind of continue this research into the future, or look into it any other way?
Yeah, I definitely want to do like I want to take more classes in R and understand the language a little better because I think just knowing the language of R would be really helpful in conducting more analyses like this with national level data sets. So I definitely want to do more of that in the future.
Yeah, yeah, definitely learning that will be very helpful. But you have a lot of time, so great. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
presenting.